What up, what up, what up? Happy Monday. Welcome to The Cult. The Cult is a show that I stream Monday through Friday on YouTube, on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and on Rumble, where we talk about, or rather do, deep dives into the far left. We watch trainings that no one else on the internet is watching. We show you what the left talks about behind closed doors when they think people like us are not listening. And because of that, the people who watch my content are quite literally years ahead of every journalist, of every pundit, of every commentator. While James Lindsay is screaming about Gnostic sex cults, we're learning that they want to abolish the gender binary and the nuclear family because of capitalism. Well, Jesse Kelly is pretending to care about communism. What do you guys know? Fun fact: Jesse Kelly, who I guess is like this big time man conservative influencer who just wrote a book about anti-communism. Jesse Kelly quite literally blocks anyone that mentions me in his replies. I've never even spoken to Jesse Kelly, but Jesse Kelly is so afraid of what the real communists are doing and the lie and exposing that the lies he tells his audience are completely unhinged from reality that he just elects not to have that conversation. You do, bot. You do. Jesse blocked me. I don't know what he has to say. Yeah, I mean, like another person just replied to Jesse. The reason I bring this up is another person today just replied to Jesse Kelly saying, "Hey, Jesse, you should really talk to Carlin." And I said to them, I was like, he's going to block you. And within like half an hour, she was blocked. Yes, somehow all of the influencers are writing books this year on socialism, and none of them have any idea what they're talking about. What a time to be alive. Well, guys, today we're going to be returning to something that I wanted to watch last week, and then we didn't get a chance to watch it last week. I want to go back and I want to watch this free speech, political speech, hate speech panel at Harvard. It is a relatively long one. I don't know that we'll actually get through all of it because there's a couple things I want to talk about first. But I want to watch this. I want to see how it goes, and hopefully we get through a whole bunch of it today, if not the whole thing. But that is what we're going to be watching. I do just want to jump right into some other orders of business I have though, before we get started with that, and something fun. I think it's fun. You might not think it's fun, but I think it's fun. Anyway, I want to start off, of course, with my Substack, which is Carlin, Karlyn.substack.com. If you are not yet subscribed to my Substack, now is going to be a great time to do it because we have just launched the new Unwoke zine project. And this is available to if you want to participate in this project. This is happening in my supporter Discord. You can become a supporter by contributing $8 a month, $80 a year. That gets you access to my Discord. It gets you access to my community calls, all that good stuff. But check this out. I have some amazing supporters in my Discord who are creating some awesome propaganda materials. And these are designed to be printed out at home for people so that you guys can distribute them in coffee shops and bookstores and music stores. Like, they're going to blend right in with leftist content, so leftists won't exactly know what they're getting. There's going to be stickers. Yep, bots doing some stickers today that I haven't yet made into stickers, but I have been working on it. I actually spent the good bit of the morning working in my merch store as I was having a chat with someone else on the internet. And let me show you. I'm not going to show you the full thing today because I don't have it all launched yet, but I am starting to launch merch in the Unwoke Art merch store. So you guys are going to be able to get some of these designs on merch, which is going to be great. I don't know why my phone is going off right now as I'm live on the internet. Probably a spam caller. Yep, we're going to decline that shit. Go away. Go away. Anyway, you're going to be able to get some of the designs on some sweet merch. I just think it looks so cool, and I want to thank the people who made it for allowing me to put it on merch because, like, it's honestly badass. It really is. And so we're going to be doing a lot of stuff with this idea. There's Bot's iPhone wallpaper, which looks awesome too. Everyone can participate in this project. If you guys don't like this particular style that you're seeing, this is actually like, I mean, like I respond really well to this, but if you don't like it, we've got like a couple different people working on this right now. That's okay. You can come and do a different style. They're like Honest Dog in my Discord is amazing at teaching people how to do this stuff. So I really appreciate her. I really appreciate Gayla. I really appreciate Bot. I really appreciate like everyone that's working on this because it looks rad. And this is how you change culture, guys, by going out into the real world and having things you can distribute, because these are all meant to be printed off by you, photocopied, distribute it in your communities. We're going to be doing some cool stuff with this. And so more to come on that, but the best way to get access to that is by joining my Discord, which you can do by heading over to my Substack, signing up for $8 a month, $80 a year. And well, they don't just come in black. This actually comes in different colors. Hang on. You can get this in black, which is my favorite. You can get it in gold, or you can get it in red. Look at that. You can get some other colors, and actually most of my shirts do have other colors. They're not just all black. But I think black looks best on people, and I think black makes colors pop. It's like the reason the tattoos are outlined in black is it makes everything pop. I think it looks cool. Anyway, you can get some other colors too. And by the way, guys, if you want specific colors, let me know, and I can probably put the shirt in that color. But if you guys don't tell me what colors you want, then I'm going to put it in colors that I think look good. I don't think this shirt's gonna look good in pink. I mean, we can try it in pink if you really want one. We could try it in navy blue as well. You know, these are all possibilities. But you guys got to tell me. If you tell me, Carlin, can you put that? Actually, you know what's funny? Judy not too long ago wanted that. She wanted this bag, but Judy has a cat, and cat fur gets everywhere, so she wanted this bag, and she said, "Carlin, can you make me a lighter color of that bag?" And I said, "Yes, Judy, I can make you a lighter color." And I made her a lighter color bag, and it actually looks awesome, and I kind of want one, and I'm going to get one for myself as well. So if you guys just tell me what colors you want, I can probably do that, but you have to tell me, all right? I can't do tie-dye. Actually, I might be able to do tie-dye. We can look into that. Anyway, that's going to be coming soon to the Unwoke Art Store. I also want to bring people's attention to a couple things I wrote about in my newsletter yesterday. Now, number one, guys, tomorrow around 7 p.m.-ish to 9:30 p.m.-ish, we are going to be having our very next supporter only spy stream. Now, if you've never been to a spy stream is when we go inside a live woke training and you see what's happening live. We infiltrate it, we pretend we're participants, and I'm very, very excited about what we're doing tomorrow. It's going to be awesome. But that is only available to my supporters. Now, we will be doing our normal 5 p.m. stream. So, don't worry, we're going to do that. But around 7 p.m.-ish, we're going to be switching gears, and I will be inviting all of my supporters on Substack, on Locals, Twitter subscribers, YouTube channel members. You guys are going to get invited to the special supporter-only stream, and you guys are the only ones that are going to have access to the links, and we're going to go inside a live whiteness training, anti-racist training. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. That's going to be tomorrow. And also remember, on Thursday, we have our first How to Speak Socialist live course. Now, if you have been to my level 1 How to Speak Socialist before, you don't need to go again unless you really want to. But for everyone new, especially people who are new to my socialism content, this is going to be a great chance for you to get a live crash course in the language of the left. So make sure you sign up over on my Substack. These events are completely free. You can make a donation if you want to, but they are completely free. And so if you want to come to that, please do make sure you sign up. If you are not available on that time on Thursday, then sign up anyway, and you'll get a recording. All right. So that's what's going on there. Also, happy tax day. I filed my income taxes earlier. I was hemming and hawing. I was like, maybe I'm gonna do an extension. I say this every year. I'm like, I don't feel like doing my taxes. I'm gonna do an extension. And then I just sit my ass down for several hours and I do the taxes. And then I see how much money I owe the government. And then I take an extra strong look in my email just to make sure I have every single receipt for every single business expense throughout the year. And then I update that. Fuck you, IRS. I'm sending you thousands of dollars. I don't want to hear about it. Mac B says tomorrow will be my first spy stream. Well, welcome, Mac B. You're going to have a great ass time. Yeah, exactly. Everyone give 2 middle fingers to the IRS. The IRS can go fuck itself. Whatever. But do you know what else today is? Do you know what? Now, can I have a moment to talk about me and a very important? This has nothing to do with anything other than today. Today is a very nostalgic day for me. Because today, 10 years ago today, I ran My first of 2 Boston marathons. Is anyone watching the Boston Marathon today? Anyone keep up with what was going on? And so this is actually really a nostalgic day for me. And both these medals look the same. I ran the Boston Marathon in 2014 and 2015. They look exactly the same. They just have different years on them. But the Boston Marathon for me, it's like you guys don't understand. Like I lived on the marathon route in college. This is when I fell in love with running. Yes, I used to be a runner. I can't run anymore because of reasons. But I used to be a runner and I fell in love with running in college and I was right on the marathon route and the Boston Marathon, if you have never gone to the Boston Marathon, it's spectacular. It is the greatest road race in the world. It's just like it's there was an energy about it that I just cannot describe. And it was always something that I wanted to do. But then life got in the way and I'm not a very fast runner, so but I can do it like when I start doing it. And so I had always wanted to do the Boston Marathon. My husband and I were running, we were doing like half marathons, we were doing all that stuff. And then something funny happened, which is my husband and I were at the finish line of the 2013 Boston Marathon. Now, if anyone does everyone remember what happened at the 2013 Boston Marathon? Yeah, some bombs went off. And this was a deeply traumatic experience for me, like in ways that I cannot adequately express. Like I don't really even usually talk about it publicly, but like it was so my husband and I were standing across the street from where the second bomb was, like for most of the day. And you know, I don't like this is like like intervention, but by the grace of God, okay? Because we had walked away, we were going to get food, and we were a block and a half away from the second bomb when it went off. And it was just like I can't even describe like what it was like to be in that situation at that time. Like no one knew what the fuck was happening. There was smoke everywhere. Everyone's running and screaming. They shut down all the transportation in the city. My husband and I had to get back to North Station, which they had shut down the T, which is like the subway. And so we had to walk from like not knowing what the fuck was going on or if there was going to be any more bombs or anything going off in the city. We had to walk from Boylston Street to North Station, which is a little bit of a hike. And I wasn't even sure exactly how to get there. And the phones weren't working and my battery was running out. And I was just trying to post on my social media telling people that I was okay because everyone knew I was at the finish line. And everyone was like, oh shit. Like my phone was pinging from like, are you okay? Are you okay? But like internet. Anyway, it was a traumatic experience. And we just get to North Station and we like dive onto the commuter rail because it was just like it was about to leave and then we just like sat there we were like and then it started to like all sink in what had happened and we started seeing the news anyway. So that was in 2013 and so I worked out my feelings about being there that day by running the marathon the next 2 years. And I want to just share, can I share it with you guys like something because and I don't think some people have seen this. Some people in my locals community have seen this. Um so when I ran in 2014, what I did was so in the Boston Marathon, there's like the last 2 turns in the Boston Marathon are like really famous. They're on t-shirts and stuff. And it's the right on Hereford and left onto Boylston Street. And Boylston Street is the last stretch of the Boston Marathon for before the finish line. And so when me and my friend Jess, who I was running with, like when we turned onto Boylston Street, I took out my phone and I started filming the last like 0.3 miles of my Boston Marathon experience. Do you guys want to see what it's like to finish the Boston Marathon from the perspective of a runner? Like it's something else, man. I'll tell you what. And I got to say like the weather was perfect when I ran it. The 2014 marathon was like perfect weather. 2015 marathon sucked. It was raining, it was cold. I actually finished the 2015 marathon I think half an hour faster than I finished the 2014 one because I just wanted to get done. I was like, this sucks. I was also injured in the 2015 one, but the 2014 one, we were like relaxing. We were just having a good time with it. Anyway, this is the video that I took. Now, the video is shaky because I was literally going like this, okay? I literally just had my phone. Like, I was like, so I was running, holding my phone like this. But this is what it's like to finish the Boston Marathon. All right, Jess.
Ready?
I was delirious too. I was delirious.
We're doing this. We can see it. We can see it. Finish strong. This whole race, this moment, take this video. People better appreciate it. We're doing this.
That's my mother and Victor on the side, by the way.
Fabian Jump, Redwood City, California. Mr. Caruso, Charlestown. Scarlett Orozco, and again from London, Great Britain. Cynthia Anderson from Manchester, Mass.
So that's what it's like to finish the Boston Marathon. If anyone has ever wanted that experience, it honestly is one of the most exhilarating things I've ever done. I can't like I know it seems silly for people who haven't done this, and like I had just run 26 miles, but like it was just really emotional, and I'm really like pleased to be able to share that with you guys, and I hope it comes through. I know it's not a perfect recording, but that was an experience that I'll never forget. I cannot believe it was 10 years ago. Like, I really do believe that everyone should run a marathon at some point in their lives. I know not everyone can, and there are all sorts of reasons, but like running a marathon, first of all, training to run a marathon and then actually doing it will teach you a lot about yourself. It will teach you like who you are. It will teach you to dig deep when you don't think you have anything else to give. It's oh God, I trained for months. I trained for months before this. I started training when I was running the marathon. I think so the marathon is in April. I think I started training in November. So like several times a week, just like it was amazing. And so I was reminiscing with Victor earlier. Victor was in that video. I know it was like super quick. Victor was like hanging out with my mom in that video, and Victor was saying, "Carla, remember when me and your mother got trashed the night before the Boston Marathon, and you were trying to sleep, and we came banging into the room, and you were annoyed because you had to get up?" I was like, "Yeah, Victor, I remember when you went out with my mother the day before I had to run a marathon to get drunk. I do remember that. I do remember it indeed." But I don't know. If you can't run a marathon, try to go to the Boston Marathon sometime if you have the opportunity to. It honestly is like the most fun day. Like there is no better day and better location than being in Boston on Marathon Monday, and everyone should do it at least once. No, my mother and Victor did not run with me. Victor ran part of it with me the following year. In fact, let me show that picture. Hang on. We're already late for the stream I want to do. Since we're reminiscing anyway, let me show you guys. Oh shit. My mother's like posting pictures. My mother is literally posting pictures of my husband and I on Facebook right now from the marathon. And some of them are not flattering, and so I'm not going to show you the ones that are not flattering, but hang on, let me show you. I'll show you the good one. I'll show you if my Facebook wants to actually load. Hang on. It's almost there. It's trying real hard. Okay, no, don't pause. Pause. So this is Victor didn't run with me in 2014 because he didn't know if he was going to be allowed to, but he did run with me in 2015. This is actually one of my favorite pictures of Victor and I ever, because in 2015, it was cold, it was raining, it sucked. I was injured because I messed up my leg when I was training, but I was still going to run the marathon, because it's like, if you have a Boston Marathon bib, you suck it up and you run the goddamn marathon, even if you're injured. I'm sorry, man. Like, you just do it. So I was injured. I was not in a good mood. It was cold. So Victor met me, I think, at mile 17, and he ran with me through mile 25. And so this is one of the pictures of Victor and I on the course of the 2015 Boston Marathon. It's one of my favorite pictures that I have of him. And it's just like, he's like, Victor, I think this was right after Heartbreak Hill. And Heartbreak Hill, for people who don't know, it's like Heartbreak Hill in the Boston Marathon. And I swear we're going to get to real stuff in a second. I'm having a moment where I'm reminiscing, okay? Heartbreak Hill in the Boston Marathon is around mile 20. And when you're training for like a marathon, basically what's going to happen around mile 20 is your body is going to run out of carbs no matter how perfectly you eat, and it's going to switch to burning fat. And so at that point, that's where you hit the wall. When they talk about hitting the wall, it's when your body runs out of carbs to burn and it has to switch over to like burning fat. That's what happens right before Heartbreak Hill in the Boston Marathon. Heartbreak Hill is not one hill, it's 3 fucking hills back to back to back right near the Boston College campus. And this, I think, is at like the top of one of those hills. And Victor was yelling at me. He's like, "Carlin, you can have as much beer as you want when you finish." And I did. I did have beer after that Boston Marathon, and it was glorious. Anyway, that's what I was doing 10 years ago and 9 years ago. And then I made Victor take a video of me right before I ran the 2015 one, where Victor has this video that he's saving on his phone, where I'm like, I'm saying into the video, I'm like, "Never let me do this again. This sucks." Because like the training for a marathon is so hard, and you have to train during the winter, and it just really sucks. And so I made Victor take a video of me saying, "I'm never running another marathon again," because I knew as soon as I ran the marathon, I would want to do it again. And so now Victor has this video where anytime I'm like, maybe I should get back into running, maybe I should try doing a marathon again, Victor pulls out the video. He's like, "Remember what happened last time, Carlin? Don't do it again." Anyway, but it was good while it lasted. I will never regret those years of my life. But I suppose we can't do that stuff forever. I'm getting old and creaky, and I would have to really go back to the gym and lose weight and do a whole bunch of stuff to marathon again. So I don't know that that's in the cards. Anyway, let me thank you guys for letting me share that with you. I really do appreciate it. Now let's get into business. We are going to be watching today a good portion, though possibly not all, of this panel from Harvard from 4 months ago. It is called Free Speech, Political Speech, and Hate Speech on Campus. So let's see what Harvard had to say about hate speech on campus 4 months ago. So after October 7th, this was uploaded to their channel on December 15th, 2023. I think, was that before Claudine Gay resigned? This might have been before the president of Harvard resigned. I don't remember the exact date, but we're going to see what Harvard was saying about hate speech on campus a couple months ago. Please make sure you mount that like button for me, guys. Let's get this party started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tomiko Brown-Nagin, Dean of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you, whether you're joining us in person or online, to today's panel, Free Speech, Political Speech, and Hate Speech on Campus. Now, we planned this conversation some weeks ago, but I bet you know that it's become an increasingly crucial conversation. Before I introduce the substance of today's program, allow me to express my gratitude to the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and all our annual donors whose generosity keeps our programs free and open to the public. I also want to thank today's distinguished speakers for sharing their expertise and their perspectives. And I thank everyone who is joining us this afternoon for engaging in this critically important conversation. As I move to an introduction of the substance of the program, I have a request for you. During this fraught period of understandably strong opinions and strong emotions, I ask that we engage with one another as generous listeners, with open minds.
That's good advice, but I suspect they don't follow it that often.
Thank you in advance for doing so. We must begin the session by acknowledging the devastating and continuing effects of the October 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel.
I'm going to turn my mic down a little bit.
Humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
I know it's loud.
Following Israel's counterstrikes, and the impact of these events around the world, including in our country, on our college and university campuses. In the wake of these terrible events, we've witnessed protests and counter-protests expressing a range of political viewpoints in support of Israelis and all Jewish people, in support of the Palestinian people, and in support of justice and peace for all. Meanwhile, many are grieving and afraid for themselves and their loved ones. And I want to say that whatever your political viewpoints, we must not harden our hearts to human suffering anywhere, including on our campus. We also must acknowledge that in the wake of this crisis, law enforcement officials in the US have noted a sharp increase in anti-Semitic, anti-Arab, Islamophobic speech, harassment, threats, and assaults. And they've included graphic online death threats and grievous, even fatal assaults. These horrific events have underscored, to quote NPR journalist Juliana Kem, the increased violence against Jewish, Muslim, and Arab communities in the US since the Israel-Hamas war broke out. Yes, these are tumultuous and disturbing times. And it is my sincere hope and my expectation that we stand against all hatreds, realizing that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, during his leadership of the American civil rights struggle, a movement that was predicated on nonviolence and one aided by First Amendment freedoms. That movement, we should remember, helped produce the civil rights laws that enable us all to be here together today, united in the search for knowledge across lines of race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, religion, ideology, and so many more categories. The questions that we'll engage today about how to reconcile free speech, hate speech, and political speech at colleges and universities are far from new. The current moment joins a long history of contested speech in higher education and beyond. For decades, university communities have sought to establish the boundaries of protected speech and protest. Flashpoints have erupted at many points, perhaps most famously during the 1960s and 70s, during the civil rights, free speech, and anti-Vietnam War protests. Students engaged in political activities and protest and insisted that universities honor their freedom of expression. Society and college and university campuses were deeply divided on domestic and international issues. Around the same time, federal and state authorities passed laws that ban discrimination and harassment, including Titles VI and Title IX of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And students from all walks of life, diverse along multiple identities, matriculated to college and university campuses. Campus communities became more diverse than ever before, and administrators sought to create positive learning environments, sometimes by regulating speech and conduct deemed hateful or otherwise harmful. But critics have long argued that some of these on-campus efforts infringe on academic freedom and freedom of expression, as we'll discuss momentarily. In short, today's political and societal context is unique, but the tension surrounding speech on college campuses are not unprecedented. Today's challenges underscore enduring questions about the appropriate role of institutions of higher education during times of political and social conflict, and how the mission, policies, and values of universities intersect with constitutional and statutory law. Our panel seeks to address these complex questions, and we ask these experts to do so because our ability to weather deeply emotional, challenging periods as a community requires us to know about our rights and responsibilities. And it demands dialogue, even and especially when we strongly disagree. And now I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. The full bios of our distinguished panelists are available on the event page for today's program.
All right, we're gonna skip over the bios. We're gonna skip over the bios. We've got a schedule to keep today. Bios are usually a long ass thing. We'll go back to them if we have to, but okay.
Modeling's past. Thank you all again for being here. We have a big task in front of us, and I'm looking forward to modeling civil dialogue with you. I would like to begin with you, Nadine Strawson. You have an extraordinary depth of expertise on the subjects that we'll discuss today.
Token white man.
I would like you to start us off by explaining the constitutional and legal rules governing expression and protest on public and private campuses.
4 months.
What kind of speech and activities are protected, and any exceptions to the general rule? In 5 minutes from now.
if you want the full story, you'll have to read my new book. But hopefully this will be an introduction. Thank you so much, Tomiko, and thanks to my distinguished co-panelists and everybody for organizing this really, really important seminar. So the United States First Amendment free speech standards, which, by the way, are only directly binding on public universities, along with the rest of the Constitution, but which the vast majority of private universities, including Harvard, have voluntarily decided to adhere to as a matter of academic freedom and pedagogical excellence. So I will refer to the First Amendment, but please be aware that we're not literally talking about the First Amendment. We're talking about Harvard's own rules,
Right.
private universities' own rules, which mirror the First Amendment. And for all of the disparaging commentary that we tend to hear about First Amendment exceptionalism, in fact, the more you know about the rules, the more they make just plain common sense, and not surprisingly, are echoed in the laws of many other countries and in international human rights free speech law as well. What the Supreme Court has said is the bedrock principle underlying our whole system of free speech is the best starting point. If I can only give you one principle, let's start with the bedrock principle. And it's what's often called content neutrality or viewpoint neutrality. Government and universities must remain neutral with respect to the idea, the viewpoint, the message, the content of the expression. They may neither favor nor disfavor particular expression because they agree with, disagree with, even loathe or generally fear the content of the expression. However, government and universities may and indeed should restrict speech when they do so for reasons that get beyond solely disfavoring the content. And those fall into two basic categories. One is content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions. So no matter
Does Harvard accept government money? So this is going to be, well, yes, Harvard absolutely accepts government money, but Harvard is a private university. So the government money is going to come in different ways. It could come through the form of like grants. It could be funding things that Harvard's doing on campus that the government will benefit from. It's kind of like, it's like the same. You remember when Princeton came out and declared themselves, this was like 4 years ago. So maybe people don't remember this, but Princeton, like several years ago, came out and declared themselves to be like an anti-racist university, and because they were like, our university is steeped in racism, and then there was this big kerfuffle. This was back when Trump was in office, that like Princeton, like the Trump administration was trying to like pull Princeton's like Title IX status because Princeton had declared that they were an overtly racist university, and that would have impacted like any federal funding or grants or any sort of that sort of stuff. But does Harvard need federal funding? That's a different question. Harvard has a $60 billion endowment. Harvard doesn't need any money from anywhere. Harvard, literally, guys, there is no student at Harvard that is paying tuition at Harvard. That's how rich Harvard is. Like, there is no student that's on scholarships. There is no student that needs loans because every single cent of that is taken care of by Harvard. That's how rich these people are. They own some of the most expensive real estate in the country in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They basically own Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is just like ungodly expensive. And it's just like, so does Harvard need the federal funding? No. Yes, Harvard, if you get into Harvard, you will basically go to Harvard for free. And this is why all these calls to like defund Harvard, defund Harvard, defund Harvard, it's not serious. It will never happen. It will literally never happen. This is why the president of Harvard can get fired for plagiarism, which I didn't think was going to happen. And I have to give Rufo credit for that one. I really didn't think he was going to get her, but he did. Like, good for him. But she went back to a $900,000 a year teaching position. The fired president from Harvard is currently making $900,000 a year teaching at Harvard.
what you say, you may not disrupt a class. No matter what you say, you may not interfere with peaceful studying in a library, and so forth. The second situation in which government and universities may and should restrict speech because the concerns go beyond mere disfavor of the content, is when the speech considered in its overall context imminently, directly causes or threatens certain specific serious harm. And this is often referred to as the emergency concept. The Supreme Court has recognized several subcategories of speech that, considering in all the facts and circumstances, may well constitute a punishable, restrictable emergency. Many of these will sound very familiar to you. Intentional incitement of imminent violence that is likely to happen imminently, targeted harassment or bullying, hostile environment harassment where there is a pervasive climate of intimidation that may include expression that is so unwelcome, objectively offensive, severe, and pervasive that it deprives a student of an equal educational opportunity or an employee of an equal employment opportunity. One other example is a genuine threat, a true threat, where the speaker intends to or recklessly instills a reasonable, that is, objective fear on the part of the targeted person that they will be subject to physical attack. And note that the speaker doesn't have to intend to actually carry out the attack. Merely instilling a fear that is reasonable already does harm, because if you're subject to that fear, it's going to impede your freedom of speech as well as your freedom of movement. Sadly, we've heard many accounts, Tomiko, coming from Harvard and other universities, that much of the expression that is taking place could and should be subject to restriction for violating these content neutral rules in the case of time, place, and manner restrictions, or because they satisfy the emergency concepts of targeted harassment or genuine threats or hostile environment harassment. If I can make one other point,
I don't like people who say harassment. It's not a real word.
Those of us who strongly support these free speech principles, and far more important than myself, are all 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court, basically going back to the second half of the 20th century when the court began to adopt these speech protective standards. Not coincidentally, in the crucible of the civil rights movement that you referred to, Tomiko, because the leaders of that movement recognized that their advocacy.
Do you feel like slime gets stickier when it's warm? Because I feel like my slime gets really sticky when it's warm in my office, and I don't like it.
Absolutely depended on these robust speech protective principles, and for that reason, we're very supportive of them. But the Supreme Court justices have acknowledged that even speech that doesn't satisfy the emergency test may well still cause a lot of harm. And I really appreciated your reference.
Yeah, I got to get one of those activators.
We have to be compassionate.
I got to get one of those activators and the spray
all the ways that people are hurting on campus, students in particular, but also faculty members and others. And even if the remedy is not to censor certain speech. Well, first of all, the one remedy which you alluded to is make sure to punish and to restrict actual violence and threatened violence, of which we've sadly seen too much. Also, to punish the expression that transgresses the generous but still finite bounds of protected free speech. That must be done. But even with respect to core constitutionally protected speech that is advocating ideas that we consider offensive and loathsome and evil.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Is not just
I can put my slime in my new little mini fridge.
Our remedy as educators in particular is to do something more. It's often called counter speech in the law. The Supreme Court justice that first phrased the concept of the emergency standard. Louis Brandeis, interestingly enough, the first Jewish justice on the Supreme Court, he first framed that concept in a dissent. It was ultimately accepted unanimously by the court in 1969. He said the fitting remedy to evil counsels is good ones. And I think it is not enough for those of us who oppose censoring speech, whose content we loathe and find loathsome. We have a special responsibility to affirmatively raise our voices, to denounce the messages, and to provide the kind of education and support that will deepen understanding and ultimately, hopefully, eliminate or reduce the hateful attitudes of which the speech is just a symptom.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me go to Keith, who is a political scientist, and you've argued that free speech is under attack on campus, and you've made the really important point that these attacks have come from across the political spectrum. You also argue that these attacks are corrosive to the very mission of higher education. I wonder if you can say more about your diagnosis of the problem.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in a panel, and I really appreciate the initiative of the Institute to do a panel on this really important topic at this important time. Obviously, speech issues have been front and center on university campuses as well as elsewhere over the last couple of months. But unfortunately, they've really been front and center on university campuses over the last several years. And this was an issue that I think I mostly tended to take for granted earlier in my career. And I was drawn into thinking about speech disputes and the relationship between speech and universities in particular because of the light I thought it shed on the fundamental purposes of a university in the first place, why we value universities, which I think have ultimately important implications then for how we ought to conduct ourselves within those universities and what kind of policies and practices we ought to engage in. Central to me is a vision of a university as a place that's all about advancing human knowledge and trying to share what we've gained to others. And those others include not only our colleagues in scholarly professions, not only our students in the classroom, but also people out in the wider world. Society benefits from having institutions like this that can push on the frontiers of human knowledge, try to expand out those frontiers, try to expose weakness and flaws in our conventional wisdom, and then share those lessons to society as a whole. We've made a bet that we're better off as a society if we know things that are true and we can reveal things that are false, are flawed, are weak, and can be undermined. And that we're better off, despite the sometimes painful process of exposing those weaknesses, we're better off at the end of the day by exposing those weaknesses, laying them bare, and trying to build on firmer foundations. And that's what universities are all about. But if universities are going to be able to perform that task, they also have to have a great deal of intellectual freedom for those participants in the campus community who are engaged in that process of trying to bring skeptical inquiry to orthodoxies that may be very firmly held locally on campuses or in scholarly disciplines. Sometimes those are very esoteric orthodoxies that those outside the particular disputes may not even understand the content of, let alone the alleged importance of them. But sometimes those orthodoxies are essentially held but by society at large. They go to fundamental social and political and religious and moral questions that average people care about a great deal. And part of the scholarly enterprise is to raise questions about those too, which means that we need to insulate scholars and we need to insulate universities from pressures that will prevent them from raising those questions, from probing those kinds of orthodoxies in order to try to expose those kinds of weaknesses to build up stronger and tougher arguments that can survive going forward. We've tried to do that in the American universities somewhat fitfully over time, and really only for the last 100 years or so. These are relatively modern innovations that universities have become what they are now, that they're committed to the kinds of principles they're now committed to, that they develop a set of practices and protections and rules that they are now committed to. But these are essentially important to the kinds of institutions that we envisioned to try to build over the course of the last century. And on the one hand, that includes a set of policies and principles concerned with academic freedom, which I think are at the very core of the scholarly enterprise. They're concerned with protecting the kind of research and scholarship faculty and scholars on university campuses are doing, but also the teaching activity they're doing, the kind of educational process the faculty are engaged in with students on those university campuses, and having the freedom to be able to explore difficult and controversial ideas in those kinds of contexts without worrying about retaliation from university officials as a consequence of how you perform those tasks and the controversies that they may raise. And likewise, universities have come to value free expression more generally. The ability of every member of the campus community to be able to speak in public about matters of general public concern without, again, having to worry about retaliation from university officials because they've said something controversial, something that other people object to. The universities benefit, I think, from having that kind of wide open space for debate about tough ideas. And we're going to have disagreements as a consequence of that. Universities perform best when they bring those disagreements inside, when we have people with different views and different ideas and different opinions who can.
So far, I have to say, like, I find this to be like a pretty shockingly reasonable panel. I don't actually, like, I'm not saying much because they're not actually giving me much to respond to. I don't really disagree with anything that I've heard so far, which is like surprising because I really thought that they were going to be much more, I guess, aggressive about this idea, but okay.
Can engage each other in a serious way and try to understand those ideas best.
It's like,
but those are going to be.
It's like they're talking about how the university should work. Now, I'm not suggesting the university actually works that way. Like, who was it? Was it Kissinger, I think? Kissinger said university politics are so vicious because the stakes are so small. I worked in higher ed for 10 years. There is no more vicious, politically driven institution than the college and university. Like, it sucks. And so I'm not saying that universities actually function this way, but like they're making a good argument, I think, for like how the university should function. So in theory, they know what they should be doing.
Contentious and sometimes passionate and sometimes very difficult conversations to engage in. And so universities, I think, are always struggling as to how to make real those practices and how to work through particular moments of controversy. But ultimately, these kinds of robust protections for free speech, which are always under pressure, they're under particular pressure right now, are really critical to universities being able to perform the social role that we ultimately want them to be able to perform.
Thank you. And now let's go to Jeannie, my colleague. You come to this discussion as a faculty leader of the Academic Freedom Alliance, whose mission is the pursuit of an atmosphere on campus where ideas can be followed without fear that you'll be punished. And you lead a similar group here at Harvard called the Council on Academic Freedom, which launched in March of 2023.
How does the Council on Academic Freedom feel about conservative speech?
You became involved in these efforts and how you react to the claim that many universities lack credibility when leaders invoke the concept of academic freedom.
Thank you so much for that. I am a leader of those two organizations. One of them, actually, Keith, is also a leader of the Academic Freedom Alliance, which is a national organization of faculty members across the nation who
I bet that's not woke at all.
Created this forum and membership society for fighting against restrictions on academic freedom. And then we have that organization here at Harvard that was created earlier this year. I think that many of us, and myself included, became concerned in the last several years. And probably it started its slow erosion of academic freedom. I would date it to around 10 years ago.
Really?
And as of, a couple of years ago, it started to feel unbearable. And I think that for me, it is.
You know what was happening around 10 years ago was when the struggle session started on Ivy League campuses. I remember this. I was in higher ed consulting at the time. This was like a big fucking deal. When Yale students started yelling at professors about like Halloween costume. Does anyone remember this? Like, this was a precursor to Evergreen State College. This was a big thing in higher ed when the protests started on campus, when the student radicals started behaving like crazy people. I wonder if that's what she's referring to. I hope it is.
It's incredibly common for students to say in the privacy of just office hours where they're alone, to say, I never would speak my mind, regardless of what their
regarding what,
whether they are conservative, liberal,
regarding what.
They say, I would never speak my mind. I would never raise my hand in class to actually express a viewpoint, even if I know some people might agree with me, because other people won't agree with me, and then I might be subject to some kind of shaming campaign or
The
ostracized.
struggle sessions.
And I think teachers also have told me in droves that they have altered their syllabi, altered what they're willing to teach, even cut out entire subjects. And those are the ones that I tend to emphasize in my classes, such as topics about gender, sexual assault, racial discrimination. Those are the topics that many teachers who don't specialize in them said, I used to include these topics, but now it's too risky. Even if they're not espousing any viewpoint that itself would be considered controversial, because somebody might say something that then other students would react to, and then you'd have a problem on your hands, and then you wouldn't have a kind of a smooth running classroom experience. So all of those things, which I started teaching at Harvard in 2007, and that was just not what I really experienced as a teacher, and that's not what I heard from students. That is why I have been active in the academic freedom leadership space in the Academic Freedom Alliance and the Council on Academic Freedom. I'm happy that I see several members of the council here today, including one of the co-presidents. And so it's been very important to defend academic freedom, namely, unfortunately, by going after instances in which somebody is experiencing some kind of official discipline by a university, maybe an investigation and a complaint, and really trying to defend that person's right to say it. Most of the time, I will disclose the speech. I mean, the majority of the time on the Academic Freedom Alliance, I will say myself, that is speech that I don't like, but I will full-throatedly defend it. And I'll give you an example. Amy Wax, she said Asian Americans might not have this spirit of liberty, and it would be good to have less of them in the country. Do I like that? No, I think it is offensive. However, do I defend her right to say it, and I don't think the university should be sanctioning that?
She didn't say it in class. I think that's a really important point, that it was an extramural statement.
It was an extramural statement, and perhaps that for some people that's an important distinction. And some people it's not, whether you're in class, whether it's scholarship, whether it's, those are distinctions one can make. But I do think that there is a big difference between those kinds of things that we know speech that we do know we prohibit, verbal conduct, right? Sometimes it is free speech, but sometimes verbal conduct is the substance of an act of harassment or of bullying or discriminatory conduct that violates university rules. And those things are not academic freedom. But the more we expand what we think of and are willing to treat as disciplinable harassment, discrimination, and bullying, the less space there will be for free inquiry and exploration.
Thank you, Rottweiler. I did see that.
Ideas.
I appreciate
And
it.
so most of the time, if you are an academic freedom advocate, you're going to find yourself defending speech that you do not like. And that's just the bargain. And if you are someone who only wants to defend speech that you do like, then that's not a full commitment to academic freedom. And so I think that's what I believe that the people who have been leaders of this movement in the last several years, I think that is what we all have in common. We are not the same in terms of our political leanings, not in any way. And Keith is laughing because we are very good.
Very good.
I'd love to make a comment if I could.
Sure,
or
quickly. And as you
I don't want to
do,
interrupt your flow. Sorry.
no, it's okay. As you do, I want to welcome Professor Chenoweth to the stage. She is joining us from a faculty meeting.
Oh, this person's definitely not woke.
Thank you for being
This
here.
is
and
a
quick follow-up.
non-binary
I just wanted to
person,
say,
yes!
as the president of a civil liberties organization that was
Yes.
always on the forefront of the civil rights movement, that infamously has defended free speech for Nazis. I really believe, Jeannie, this is not just a turn of phrase, that we're not defending the speech. We're not defending what Amy Wax said. I think it's really, and we're not defending what the Nazis said. I think it's really important to keep emphasizing that we are defending a principle that is essential for those who want to oppose what Amy Wax said, who want to oppose what the Nazis say. And some of us use the phrase the golden rule of free speech, that we literally are not going to have freedom for the speech
So
that
she's
we
like an
love
old school
unless
person.
we also defend it for the speech that we loathe.
Thank you so much for that follow-up. And I want to move us into a conversation about hate speech, and in particular, the kinds of things that we're seeing these days after October 7th, the terrorist attack, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Some are claiming that protected political speech is really crossing a line into threats, into harassment. And I've spoken to many students, Jewish and Israeli students, Palestinian students, Arab, and they all want to be safe and protected. And many of them are fearful. And I want you to talk a bit more, Nadine, about what constitutes hate speech, and what kinds of things might cross the line. And you can answer me at a level of generality that allows me then to talk about the campus codes that I wanted to cover in some detail.
Okay. So the same general principles that you kindly invited me to lay out at the beginning, Tamiko, apply specifically to so-called hate speech. And I'm using the scare quotes because it's not, as you well know, not a...
So Bot says that she was the former president of the ACLU. Maybe she was the president of the ACLU before the ACLU went completely woke, because she seems kind of like, to me, like an old school, like free speech, like Democrat, which is what I used to be back in the day. And maybe that would be a little refreshing if that's right.
legal term of art, precisely because the Supreme Court
2008,
has
yeah,
never
old
recognized
school,
a category of speech
lefty,
defined by
fucking
its
free
hateful
speech advocate.
content and said, therefore, it's unprotected by the First Amendment. To the contrary, consistent with the viewpoint neutrality principle, you're completely free to express hateful ideas. What you may not do is express those ideas in a particular factual context that crosses the line and satisfies the quite specific definitions of speech, categories of speech that satisfy the emergency principle. So let's take the example of harassment. We tend to use that term relatively loosely in everyday speech, but the Supreme Court has quite narrowly defined two kinds, relevant here, two kinds of constitutionally unprotected harassment. Number one is when the speech is directly targeting a particular individual or small group of individuals and subjects them to repeated, pervasive, or sufficiently severe, pervasive offense that it interferes with their privacy, with their freedom of movement. So it has to be individually targeted. It can't, and that could be satisfied by some of the videotapes that I've seen from this campus and others of students who are not only participating in a general demonstration, voicing slogans that some other students see as discriminatory and hateful. That is protected political speech, regardless of whether one would deem the message to be hateful or not. It's a general expression to a general audience. But if some of those demonstrators were to follow a particular student and chant those slogans in the presence of the student. That clearly, I think, could be seen as punishable targeted harassment. The same thing about threat, I'll just give that as another example. Again, in everyday speech, we tend to use the word relatively loosely, that I feel threatened by the fact that there are so many demonstrators who are calling for the, annihilation of the state of Israel. I take those emotional reactions very seriously, but I would not consider it, more importantly, the Supreme Court would not consider it a punishable true threat. And the court uses the adjective true to distinguish it from the loose way we use the word
And why
threat.
is it not a true threat?
Because here are the requirements of a true threat: that the speaker has to mean to, that means intend, intentionally or recklessly instill in a targeted person. So not to a general audience. It's not one-to-many speech. It's one-to-one or one to a handful of audience members' speech. Intend to instill a reasonable fear that you personally are going to be subject to attack. Now, I mentioned that there's another kind of harassment which kind of overlaps here, and that is, I understand that the Department of Civil Rights, the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education has launched an investigation
Right.
against Harvard, among other universities, on the allegation of hostile environment
Right.
harassment. And that gets a little bit closer to what you're wisely questioning about, Tomiko. And that is, if there is such a pervasive climate of intimidation and fear, that it deprives somebody of an equal educational opportunity. I agree with the three presidents who testified in Congress.
Oh.
More importantly, the Supreme Court agrees that these tests, although they're quite precise, necessarily depend on all of the facts and circumstances and are very fact specific in their application. Reasonable people can disagree, which I understand leads to difficulties on the part of those who are enforcing and administering these laws, especially if you want to adhere, which I'm sure we all do, adhere to due process restraints, and not presume that somebody's guilty without doing an investigation.
Right. Well, I understand that there is a distinction between speaking about one's vision for a university and a moral voice, and answering questions at a congressional hearing. I've testified before Congress. It's always very political, very performative, and that I think is a part of the problem. Let's go to a conversation about how bringing in Title VI and campus conduct policies might change the analysis. And I have to say that in preparation for this event, I studied our policy and I read the policies of many universities, and I want to quote some of the language that I found. These policies promise to protect students' safety and well-being, promise freedom of movement, stipulate respectful treatment of all students, ban harassment, threats, and bullying, ban physical or verbal abuse that threatens or inhibits free expression or significantly interferes with a person's education, and one can go on and on. These codes tend to be very long. There's a lot of language in there. And I wonder, Jeannie and also
Oh,
Erica,
new person.
if you can
I want to hear
speak
from the queer
to
Marxist.
how to reconcile our commitment to protected political speech and our commitment to a campus that promises to our students all of these things, some of whom are as young as 18 years old, maybe younger, many of whom may come from backgrounds where they've experienced trauma, they're experiencing trauma, intergenerational trauma. And so it matters whose perspective one is taking, right? and it even matters who the decision maker is. But I may be answering my own question. So
Indeed.
why don't you go ahead, Jeannie, and then Erica?
Indeed.
Yes, so glad you brought that up. If you do go to those policies, they are very long. However, there is always, the lawyer will zero in on the key lines, and those key lines are where the offense that is punishable is defined.
Yes.
And so if you look at bullying, harassment, discrimination, there you can, you can see the whole document, but really what you need to know for the purpose of discipline and investigation and, actual expulsion or suspension or all kinds of sanctions, there are some key lines. And those do not provide that if you make someone feel disrespected, or if you make someone feel like their dignity is harmed, that then that person will be disciplined. That is just not how we do things around here or anywhere. Basically or they shouldn't. What they do is, for example, if you look at harassment, it has to be unwelcome conduct that is so severe or pervasive and objectively offensive, right? Not just I feel offended. It's got to be objectively offensive.
What does that mean, Jeannie?
Well, in the law, we have this debate about what are subjective standards and what are objective standards. And essentially, subjective is just how do you feel? And objective is essentially what a reasonable person would feel. And then there's a whole lot of debate about what a reasonable person would feel. It's not like it's a easy line to draw, but that's, reams of paper have been expended on what a reasonable person is. But at the end of the day, it's the idea that it's not just anyone and what they subjectively feel, but if we think a reasonable member of the community would take this to be offensive, and then even more, it has to be that it actually makes it so that the person who is experiencing this is not able to have an equal education, that it denies that person equal educational opportunity. So, those are that's a lot that you have to jump over in order to actually end up with a disciplinary result. And so essentially, the length of these policies, the university is communicating a mood, they're communicating vibes, they're communicating their aspirations and their values and principles. And that's great. The university can express those things and say, hey, we would really like you all to behave with these goals in mind. Just like Tomiko, you emphasize compassion and understanding, which is not to say that that means then you go and throw someone in jail.
Right.
So essentially that's why these policies are really long, but the key lines about what is disciplinable, they're very, very narrow definitions, whether it's bullying, harassment, discrimination, whether it's Title IX related or whether it's Title VI related. We have very tight policies. And of course, the problem is that many people feel like, oh, we have these policies, but there's room for interpretation, and you tend to put people in discipline if they say things that are conservative, and you offend people who are liberal, but you won't do the same thing if it's a liberal who offends people. And so it's just, I think that's the allegation of hypocrisy and of double standards that we are seeing on campus, and in Congress. But that's ultimately, if we stick by our policies, I would like to level up when it comes to academic freedom.
So basically what they're doing, where's my mouse? Where's my mouse? So basically what they're doing with this panel is they're kind of giving a middle finger to all the people who have said to them, you can't be on this, they're basically saying it's not fucking anti-Semitic to say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's the argument here. Now they're saying in a really nice way, they're saying that we should be able to have other ideas and we should be able to talk about those other ideas. And actually, they're not wrong, but I just want people to understand that this is a PR stunt to very nicely and very collegially push back on the idea that they should not be allowed to advocate for Palestine, because that's what the hot button thing going on was. And so that's why they did this. This is not about protecting conservative speech on campus. They don't care about that. This is specifically about Palestine.
Rather than leveling down and say, oh, you haven't punished anti-Semitism in the past, so now let's have a really expansive definition of what discrimination is, so that we can do that.
Well, I want to make sure the audience appreciates the distinction that's being drawn between punishable offenses and offering guidance.
I want to hear from the queer one.
Right? So everything that you can say, you need not say. Right? Out of
Just because you
respect
can,
for your peers.
should.
And I will pause there because I want to have, I want Erica to speak.
We should look up this person.
So, and speak about how you chaired this, the bullying, all of that process, what was involved, what kinds of policies resulted, and if you could answer this question about reconciling.
God, all the queer
protected
people have the
speech
same
with our
body language.
commitments.
It's so gross.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with that piece, which is one of the key principles, or maybe the key principle that animated our work on the
Hang on.
anti-bullying.
Erica Chenoweth. Can we look up this person? Erica Chenoweth, the something professor at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, academic dean for faculty engagement, and the First Amendment professor at the Kennedy School, and Jesus Christ. This person has like 4 different jobs at Harvard, and they're obviously a queer Marxist.
Working group was academic freedom, and how do you make sure that the policies that we do recommend and that are ultimately accepted
Thank
and
you,
implemented
Bot.
don't chill speech because of fear that people will become zealous in their use of these policies to try to silence people with whom they disagree. So it was, a guiding principle all along. But I'll say that I came around to the view in my consultations among the working group and with people all across our community at Harvard, that in fact, the policy was, its best intention is to provide academic freedom for everyone. The whole point of these policies is to make sure that everybody in our community has access to the educational opportunities here. And there are, unfortunately, some
we got a
egregious
Twitter
instances in which people have been bullied out of the institution, in which people have actually experienced, targeted discriminatory harassment. And they are few, but they are not zero. And so there needs to be sort of a minimal standard of conduct so that everyone has access to the opportunities that academic freedom promises. So I actually think that makes sense and is how I view the policies, and why it is, as Jeannie said, that we wrote them so narrowly to make sure that there was a minimum standard. Now, on the other hand,
thank you, Bot.
As you say, the policies don't speak to the culture of mutual respect that I think we all seek. And so there's other work now happening at the university level. And in my case, at the Kennedy School, we just completed 2 years of work basically on how to promote candid and constructive conversations. Really, that's the nice acronym of CCC, but what it means is, how can we have real talk about hard things across serious differences? And the answer to that is that you have to really intentionally build not just a culture of mutual trust and respect, but also skills to have these types of conversations, to convene them, to facilitate them, and to recover from them. And you have to have plenty of venues through which those conversations can take place. So this is a call not just for more, duke it out on stage debates, but actually more small group discussions where people can actually really express in small, intimate settings their genuine views, their genuine concerns, and have real disagreements that they can then move forward from. So in our case at the Kennedy School, we're just now implementing a number of different recommendations out of this work to try to focus on trust building, skill building, and venues for practicing this. And I'll mention that we also have a blueprint for this type of activity from the 2018 Presidential Task Force on Inclusion and Belonging. And our colleague Danielle Allen was one of the co-chairs of that, has a wonderful op-ed in WAPO yesterday about the fact that we can sort of have the procedural conversations here, but we also need to have the conversations about the culture of mutual respect
Yes.
and the learning of empathy, the learning of, okay, like I can say this, but ought I?
Yes.
Right? Ought I say it now? These are all very good questions for responsible people to be asking themselves. And at its core, the purpose of the university is to, basically create new knowledge, to talk about ideas, and to prepare the next generation of leaders to go out and build a better world. And I think that means that we have a responsibility to practice that well here. So, in a sense, I think,
Well,
what
yeah,
Danielle and
Starbright.
many others
I
and
was thinking this exact
people on
thing.
the
I
stage have said
agree.
before,
What do
really
they
resonates
really
with our
say?
time,
'Cause
that
I
these
don't
guiding
believe this is
principles
the
are what are
truth.
going to carry us
This is a
through.
PR stunt.
And, when we're having a tough time, this too shall pass.
Mm.
May I say something, just one word about the wonderful WAPO op-ed, which I was also going to mention, because it will resonate with the tough question you asked me, Tomiko, and this is in the spirit of being self-critical and open-minded. She put out as a hypothesis that Harvard might consider adopting a rule that even non-targeted expression, that if it were targeted, would be punishable harassment, that maybe Harvard should also consider maybe not disciplining, but strongly, at least strongly discouraging students from saying anything, even in a general audience, that might be punishable if it were directly targeted. And I thought it's an interesting hypothesis that would be worth discussing.
Well, let me go back to the idea, and Jeannie, you mentioned some of this in your earlier remarks about the consequences of speaking, the consequences of voicing dissonant ideas, politically unpopular ideas. Um,
Like
and
what?
those consequences can be really harsh,
I want to
right?
know
And
how she
I
defines
think
that.
those consequences help explain a bit about why some are fearful of speaking. They can include ostracism,
Because it is.
harassment.
And I actually think it's important to remember this. Like, this is so different from what we normally watch, right? Because we normally go inside their trainings where they're not really thinking about what they're saying. What we're seeing on this stage are expertly polished politicians. These are politicians, not literally, but in the Harvard political environment, these are politicians.
Job loss, proposed blacklisting by people with the power to do so. And I wonder if you can talk about whether there are and whether there should be certain protections for speakers who really are pushing
Pro-Palestinian
up
was what
against
she's
the
saying.
line. What are your thoughts
Anti-Zionist.
about that? All of you can speak to this.
Yes, the culture of academic freedom and its erosion is not only about official sanctions from the university. It does involve some of those other things as well. So to the extent that speaking then leads to the speaker being bullied, as it defined by the university, or harassed as defined by the university, then we have the answer there that if it actually is bullying or harassment, then that's not allowed, right? But most of the time, it's not going to end up fitting our definition of harassment or bullying, but nonetheless, can be painful. We have to understand that a consequence of speaking is counter speech, and there may be a lot of counter speech, and it may be loud, and it may be really strong counter speech. That is a desirable consequence in that we want people to speak so that they can engage with disagreement, right? And we need to build a culture in which there is tolerance for that kind of sharp disagreement and continuing conversation, not for ostracism, pushing the person out of the community, making it impossible for them to continue in their job or as a member of the student groups. and that is a cultural project that we have to engage in. And I think the Academic Freedom Alliance and the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, while we are most focused on official sanctions, it is also true that these kinds of conversations about how to have a healthy culture in which you don't freak out and then make it impossible for discourse when someone says something that you consider really offensive. And part of the problem, I'm going to go back to the theme of part of the problem is it is easy for people to say that's discriminatory, that is harassing, that violates my dignity. And okay, but that's, those are not the end of the conversation. They really should be the beginning of a real genuine engagement about why something was either hurtful or wrong. So we can't punish our way out of this.
Keith and Nadine, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on one point briefly, which is I've always had a lot of reluctance to participate in conversations about cancel culture as such. I just find it a very frustrating term, not very helpful in thinking through these kinds of questions. I like part of what Jean just said.
Yeah, why should
part of what
free
we
speech
want to try
advocates
to
participate in
build
conversations
liberal
around
democratic
cancel
society
culture?
is a greater spirit of tolerance for disagreements and
Why
a
would they
willingness
have to do that?
respect and engage and fundamentally understand that you have to live with people with very different views and opinions and religious beliefs and moral codes than you have. And so how do we successfully build a heterogeneous society in which we can actually live together and be productive at the end of the day? And that requires a great deal of tolerance for people with views that you think are extraordinarily wrong-headed. In the context of universities, it's extraordinarily important that we be extremely tolerant to even a very wide range of views, precisely because the very point of this kind of institution is to bring people together to ask maybe what seems like extremely wild-eyed questions from way out in left field and on the margins of what we might think of as acceptable opinions, precisely because that's the universities are places where we tolerate that. And we want to engage in that because we need people to put on the table things people have not really thought about, but ought to think about, even if they don't have to think about it very long before rejecting it necessarily. And so I find it particularly disturbing when universities find themselves engaged in a project of shrinking the boundaries of acceptable debate and what's going to be tolerant. At the same time, I think it's also true that one of the complicated things about these kinds of building this kind of tolerance culture is these are all going to be judgment calls. These are not about rules.
Yes.
It's always going to be the case that there are some things in some context that you find intolerable. There are people you will not want to invite to dinner anymore. There are people you will not want to associate with anymore because of certain things they've said and done. Like I said, I think in universities, we have a particular responsibility to make sure those margins are as wide as possible, that we're continuing to overcome that because that's the nature of our particular institution. But in other spaces in society, that's going to be somewhat less true. So we have to simultaneously be thinking about how we build a greater spirit of tolerance in general, while at the same time recognizing there are going to be difficult decisions on the margins about how to respond to particular kinds of opinions people might express or particular kinds of ideas they might hold. And those are going to be difficult and controversial decisions that have to be made over time that we ought to be open to revisiting over time as well.
I think the survey after survey consistently indicates that all across the ideological spectrum, on campuses all across the country, including Harvard, the single greatest factor that is cited by students and faculty as chilling their expression, not chilling their expression from slinging hateful epithets at each other, but chilling their expression in expressing certain perspectives or even asking certain questions or even addressing certain topics. Jeannie alluded to this. The single greatest factor is not fear of the government. It's not fear of Harvard University officials. It's fear of peer pressure.
I wonder
Or
why
even
that
one
is.
student can be enough to lead people to self-censor in ways that are detrimental to their educational experience. It is a matter of judgment, as all legal standards
Because they're all
ultimately
struggle
are.
sessioning
But
each
one
other.
concept that I find very helpful here, because I do strongly advocate counter speech. I wrote a whole book advocating that as the appropriate response to speech we disagree with. But counter speech can go too far. And a core legal concept in our system and in international human rights law as well is the concept of proportionality. When the responses are disproportionately harsh, even to an unwittingly offensive remark or a remark that is perceived or misperceived as insensitive, calling down, incredibly shaming, shunning responses, not only on the person who made the remark, but also intimidating other people from addressing that topic. That is counter speech that goes too far. And I controversially have taken the position in writing, so I'll say it again here, that I think that although employers have a right not to associate with students whose views they abhor, I would never say that they had a legal duty to hire those students, although I guess under some state laws, they might in fact have a legal duty. But putting that aside, I think it is a disproportionately harsh statement to categorically say that any student who was a member of these 34 organizations that issued very unpopular, controversial statements that I
Oh,
personally
so they're
found
against
extremely
blacklisting when it is used against
abhorrent to
them.
my views. Nonetheless, I think it was disproportionately harsh to categorically say we're never going to hire a single student who was a member of any of those organizations. I think that's guilt by association. I think it's
She's not
denial of due
wrong,
process.
but
And I also think it's not sufficiently compassionate, especially considering how young these people are, considering the general spirit in our society, which I completely commend, of restorative justice, recommending that
ah,
we've been overly harsh
ding,
and
ding,
overly
ding,
punitive, even toward
socialist.
people who have committed actual acts of violence. Not to mention that the criminal legal system recognizes that young people have not yet sufficiently developed in their prefrontal cortex and so forth, that they should not be held to the same high standards. So for all of those reasons, I would urge a kind of tolerance that would give them another chance and treat this as an educational opportunity rather than one for the equivalent of the death penalty.
Yeah,
Thank you.
restorative
Looks like
justice is
Jeannie
what they're
wants
going to
to
do in the
respond. As she
utopia.
does, I want to remind people that you can submit questions for the panel using the
Restorative justice is basically a struggle session.
Slido app. Jeannie.
I have heard some people say, oh, that doesn't happen, that universities would, blackball people just because of their views. Well, let me just tell you, I am an attorney. I do represent people. And I've spent much of this fall helping former students who were not even on campus this fall, who are employed at law firms, whose jobs were really in danger because they had previously been a member of some of those organizations, like when they were students here, or they had been active in the BDS movement. And some of
That's
those
divesting
students
from Israel.
really were threatened with job loss and were asked to renounce their commitment to a pro-Palestinian
BDS.
perspective in order to assure the clients of those firms who complained that the firm would not have people who had those viewpoints. So this is actually happening at these firms that you would expect to have a certain commitment to viewpoint diversity and liberal principles.
BDS is about divesting from Israel. That's what that's about. It's anti-Zionist.
Of free expression, and it's important for people
Not
to be very
BDSM.
vigilant.
Not the same
One
thing.
day it may be a movement that you're in favor of, and the law firms then are on that side. But the next day it may be a movement that you're not in favor of, or that you're the one being looked at skeptically by your employer because of something that you believe or have worked on behalf of.
Thank you. I want to go back to you, Erica, as you are an authority on nonviolent civil protest in theory and in practice.
The
wonder if you
queer
can
is an
comment
authority on
on
nonviolent protest.
how the
Imagine my
protest
shock.
tactics and goals we're seeing today might compare with ones that you're familiar with. And also, if you can talk about some keys to effective and ineffective protest actions.
Sure. So I think that it depends a little bit on what the theory of change is and who the target audience is, et cetera.
Yes.
Of course. But generally speaking, I think there are 4 key elements of successful civil resistance movements. The first is that they get bigger and bigger, so larger in size and usually larger in the diversity of the movement. The second thing they do is they begin to build a wider and wider net of political power and influence, usually by building new alliances or eliciting defections from their opponent's side onto their side. The third thing that they do is they use a variety of different methods and tactics so that they move beyond symbolic protest and typically start to use tactics that give them more kind of material leverage. And then the fourth thing that they do is that they maintain nonviolent discipline so that they aren't subject to the critiques that they're inciting violence or causing disruption or intending harm to others. So, you know, I think that those 4 things are typically associated with movements that tend to win more often than they fail. So I think that there's a lot of protest that happens that has a right to happen that doesn't necessarily meet those 4 criteria. And they shouldn't be judged for that, right? Like that political protest is a form of political expression, and it is what it is. But when it comes to whether it's going to work, I think that's when we can be a bit more analytical about whether they're meeting those 4 criteria or not.
Thank you for that. I want to go to some of the audience questions.
Yes, let's go to those.
And there are many.
Oh, we only have 10 minutes.
Let's start with this one. As an academic institution, what should be done in terms of activities, teaching, or specific efforts to stimulate critical thinking?
God, they're not going to ask anything good. All right. I'm sorry.
Civil debate.
This was an extremely kind of like just blasé presentation. We don't really have time to watch the Q&A because I have a community call in like 10 minutes. And honestly, I'm just like, man, I can't watch this anymore. I'm falling asleep. This is a PR stunt. I want to know what these people are saying behind closed doors. I want to do a deep dive into that queer Marxist Twitter account. I want to see what they actually believe. Nathan says, thanks for reaffirming my original belief that these people are crypto-Marxists. I believed that at first, but fell into the belief that it was all anti... Yes, Nathan. Yes, thank you. All right, guys, I may play just the Q&A for myself a little bit later as I'm working tonight or possibly as I'm trying to put myself to sleep later. But I guess that's all we have for today. I can't do this anymore. They're not saying anything spicy. We'll watch something spicier tomorrow. I promise. But in the meantime, please make sure you head over to my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And if you would like to join me for my supporter call that starts in 10 minutes at 7 p.m. Eastern time, which we do every Monday at 7 p.m. and every Wednesday at noon, what I need you to do is go to this here Unwoke Roundup email. And I want you to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And underneath this red box at the bottom of the email, when you are a supporter for $8 a month, $80 a year, you will find links to our 2 supporter calls that are on Mondays at 7 p.m., Wednesdays at noon. You will find a link to the supporter Discord. I definitely recommend that you get involved for that. And when is the spy stream? The spy stream that I advertised in the newsletter yesterday? Tomorrow, round about 7 p.m.-ish. It's not going to start before 7 p.m. It might start after 7 p.m. It's going to be, so I'm going to send out the links to the spy stream we're doing tomorrow. through the Substack. I will also be posting them on locals for Twitter subscribers and for YouTube channel members. This is a supporter exclusive event. We are going inside an epic whiteness training tomorrow. You guys are going to be so excited. This is only available for supporters, so please make sure you head over to the Substack and sign up for that. And that's all I have for right now, guys. I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Have a good rest of your day. We'll see you soon.